Welcome to Fielding the 68, your favorite bracketology show on the internet. My name is Greg Waddell. I am joined today by two of the best in the business, Andy Bottoms and Lukas Harkins. We're going to break down everything that happened over the weekend on the greatest Saturday slate of the season up to date. A lot has changed, a lot of big results that have shifted the scope of the bracket a month before we get to everybody's favorite month in the college basketball season. Guys, let's jump right into this. We got a lot to get to today. Andy, I'll throw it to you first. What are a couple games that jumped out to you that were the games of the week last week?
Well, I was at IU for the IU Penn State game, and I can say with great certainty that was not among them. But what, for me, the theme on the positive side of this was really teams being able to get huge road wins. You had Butler winning at Creighton on Friday night. You had Texas winning at TCU, Cincinnati winning at Texas Tech, Virginia winning at Clemson, even St. Mary's. It's not really a bubble team per se, but picking up a big road win at Gonzaga. So if you look at the winners of the weekend, those were definitely the ones that really stood out to me. We talk all the time on here about the importance of road wins and how that really matters to the committee. And so I thought there was a number of teams right, in that 8, 9, 10 range as of Friday's show, or even some that were maybe just on the inside of the cut line that picked up pretty big wins to move the needle for their profile.
Lukas, we'll throw it to you next. What jumped out at you from last week?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it was really the teams that made big moves. Obviously, Andy mentioned the Butler-Creighton move. TCU dropped a home game in there. Cincinnati got a big road win. There's a lot of things that kind of from start to finish with the weekend, starting with Butler on Friday night all the way through Villanova kind of dismantling Providence on Sunday night. Kind of from start to finish, it was a lot of those kind of big wins. And at the same time, with those teams getting wins, even the teams that just kind of dropped tough games were due to drop, even though they lost some tight ones.
What was the biggest surprise to you, Lukas? You dropped your Butler Bulldogs a couple times. We're going to talk about them later in the show, of course. I know that one got you excited. But was there anything else that jumped out to you that was shocking from a results perspective last week?
I don't think so. I think Butler and Cincinnati were probably the two big ones. I think Cincinnati going on the road at Texas Tech was a really, really big result for them. Perhaps a bigger result even for me than Butler going at Creighton, because Butler's had a good non-conference strength of schedule. Cincinnati wasn't quite there. I think they needed a really big road win to bolster their resume, and they got it. And I think that gives them a little bit more of a leeway in what is a really, really tough Big 12, where they've given themselves, they're in the right side of the field right now for me, and they weren't there coming into the weekend.
It's a good shout. I have another Big 12 team I want to ask you guys about, which we are going to hit on some of these teams later in the show as well, so apologies if we duplicate here. But one that jumped out to me as a surprise was Texas's road win against TCU, certainly with our friends at BetMGM. They were the underdogs in that game. Texas, one of these teams I just can't get a pulse on. Anytime I think I know what they're going to do, they seem to do the opposite. Andy, what was that result for you? Did that move Texas back into the serious conversation for a bit?
Yeah, they moved pretty far up the seed line. I had them as a 7 this time, and they were probably a 10 on Friday, if I'm remembering correctly. And really, when you look at their resume, they now have 4 Quad 1 wins. All of them fall in Quad 1A. And so even though they're 1-2 in Quad 2 and they have a Q3 loss and they've got 8 wins in Quad 4, they've got a demonstrated ability at this point to beat good teams and win them on the road. So of their 4 best wins, 3 of them are on the road at Cincinnati, at Oklahoma, and at TCU now. So, road wins mean a lot. They've been able to work through that and get those. Now, you also look at their profile. They dropped a game at West Virginia, and that's what made Cincinnati's win that Lukas talked about so important, is it came on the heels of losing there, and they lost at home to Central Florida. So there's some not great things on the Texas profile as well, but those really high Quad 1 wins often carry the day when it comes to the committee. So has put them in a much better place, and certainly playing in the Big 12, they have lots more opportunities left to get big wins as we go down the stretch. But that really puts them in a pretty good position, especially as you compare them to other teams around the kind of middle of the bracket, where there's plenty of things to not like about plenty of teams there. And so if you find a way to get a team that's got 4 really high-end wins, that really stands out.
So you mentioned the importance of road wins, how much that can improve a resume dramatically, especially if you're looking at two resumes next to each other. Biggest road win of the weekend for sure in my eyes was Tennessee in Rupp Arena, 103 points. Anytime you hang that on Kentucky, that's notable. We're going to talk more about Tennessee later in the show. I want to ask these guys if they have a serious chance at maybe pushing all the way up to the number 1 seed line. We're going to reveal our consensus number 1 seeds here in just a few short moments, but little tease for later in the show. If you want to know what we think of Tennessee's long-term chances, stay tuned. We will break that down later. There was another Big 12 result. We're kind of just going through Big 12 games, but this conference fascinates me. I think it's the strongest conference in college basketball. I won't be surprised at a very high number of teams ending up making the field from this league. And I think there's a lot of teams that still have a lot of wiggle room with where they can land. 2 of those being Baylor and Iowa State. Crazy finish in this game. Otzelberger calls the little throwback play that ends up being ruled just late at the buzzer. Baylor survives at home. Lucas, first off, does the committee remember a moment like that? Like, is that something that matters and you put a star on the resume of like, well, Iowa State almost won that game, or is it just counted as a loss like any other loss?
Yeah, I wouldn't think they'd put a star next to it. I think it just is what it is. It's a loss, and also one that, I think that we get a little caught up sometimes in like these close losses. Well, they almost won that game versus it just being regarded as a loss. And I think that's where we get the biggest benefit from having metrics like the BPI and KenPom on your team sheet is they recognize the value of only losing by 1 versus losing by 10. Like that was a close loss and deserves to be regarded as a close loss. And over the course of an entire season worth of data points, we can't expect the committee to remember every close loss that every team had and all of the circumstances that went into those games. So that's where I think we get the biggest benefit from having those metrics added on. And in this particular game, this for me was a 3 versus a 4 seed straight up game. Baylor moved to my 3 seed line, and Iowa State down to my 4 based off this game.
Andy, do you agree with those numbers for those 2 teams?
Yeah, that's what I had as well. I think I agree with Lucas in the sense that the margin of victory is factored in as those other numbers. This was just a really important game for Iowa State to be able to win such a big game on the road. And they need to do things to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, they're pretty high on the seed list as it is, but the metrics are all decent, but their non-conference strength of schedule is really poor. There's been tons of conversation about the Big 12 and how some of these teams have just blown the doors off of lesser competition, and that has worked well for them. But the reality is, you're now in this. We kind of led into this with the road win conversation, and for them, they've won at TCU, and that's really the only meaningful road win that they have so far, at least against a tournament type team. So being able to win in Waco would have been massive for them, and it's a loss that doesn't hurt you, but I think it's a missed opportunity in a game that you were close, because the Big 12 is going to be such that there may be some other road games that you don't have that shot down the stretch. And so in one that they played well enough to give themselves a chance at the end, that's where it hurts them as much as anything. But those 2 teams, as Lucas said, somewhat interchangeable in different ways. But I think Baylor, when you really look and compare the 2 at this point, having won that game, there's a little separation and gave them the 3 seed as opposed to the 4 for Iowa State.
Appreciate the insight there, guys. Obviously, a great weekend of games. If we didn't hit your team, if you're watching this show right now, don't worry. There's a whole lot of show left. We will probably talk about them later in the show. For now, I want to get to our consensus number 1 seed. So let's reveal the Fielding the 68 Crews overall number 1 seeds. Purdue as the number 1 overall seed. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody at this point. On the road in the Kohl Center, they emerged victorious over the weekend. UConn, another team that picked up a huge one over St. John's. Those 2 just continue to hold serve at the top of college basketball. Houston suffered that loss to Kansas. They were the rare road favorite against Kansas over the weekend. Got packed up like a lot of teams do at Fog Allen. And then North Carolina emerges as our 4th number 1 this week with the decisive victory in the rivalry game over Duke. Let's just go around the horn here quickly. Lucas, any surprises from that group of 4 for you?
Nope, it's been the same 4 for 2-3 weeks now. Kind of been sticking with that group. I think it's going to be really hard to knock either Purdue or UConn off that top line right now. And the fact that UConn's not the number one overall seed says so much about how good Purdue's resume is, because in an average year, UConn's the number one overall seed right now, and it's probably not even close. They're 11-2 across the upper two quadrants, 8-2 in quad one. Yet Purdue's 15-2, 8-2 in quad one, and 6 of those wins are quad 1A. Purdue has the edge there for number one overall seed, and UConn's an extremely powerful number 2 overall seed. Houston stands pat. They're still the best team across quality metrics. And a loss to Kansas doesn't really change all that much, especially when it's on the road. North Carolina picked up its win over Duke. They're 9-4 across the upper two quadrants. I think there's becoming a few contenders for that last one spot, whether that's a Tennessee or an Arizona or a Kansas or even a Marquette. I think there's contenders there, but for the time being, it stays being these 4.
Interesting. Less movement than in past years when we've done the show at this point in the season with our consensus top 4. Yeah, they're holding serve. You're right. Although I'm going to press you on the one team of that group that doesn't keep winning, but I want to throw it to Andy first. Andy, your thoughts on our consensus number 1 seeds right now? Is that the right group?
Yeah, to the extent that that's the group that I had, then I guess I would say it's the right group. But I do think maybe different than other years. I would agree with what you said, Greg, in the last couple of years of doing the show. We've seen more churn. I think this year feels different in terms of having a good group of teams right behind North Carolina at this point who have a path to be able to play themselves into that and have some quality wins. So I think that will be something interesting to watch in the coming weeks as you try to figure that out, because using Carolina as an example, and this is not just hurting them, but going to hurt some of the other teams in the ACC. They host Clemson. They do still go on the road to Miami, Syracuse, Virginia, and Duke, but not a ton to, outside of Virginia and Duke on the road. Some of those other games are quad 1 wins, but those are the ones you can really move the needle with, as well as Clemson at home. So just the chances for quality wins, that also kind of hurts Arizona. They do have the mountain road trip against Utah and Colorado coming up this week. Kansas, obviously tons of opportunities in the Big 12. And then Tennessee has a relatively easy stretch coming up, and then they have a really tough close with Auburn, Alabama, South Carolina, and Kentucky over their last 4. So each of the teams has ways to help themselves a little bit, but some, as you look across those 4 teams maybe in contention for that last spot, there's some that have a lot more opportunities than others, and that'll be interesting to watch play out over the next few weeks.
So I told Lucas I was going to push back a little bit. Just quickly on Houston, you said all the 1 seeds keep winning. Houston did not win over the weekend. The quality metrics love them. You alluded to it, right? They're still number 1 in KenPom, even though Purdue looks great, UConn looks great. Houston's the number 1 team in the country. Why? I don't know. They have 1 win against the KenPom top 20 on the season. Why does the quality metrics love Houston so much this year, Lucas?
Well, for one, trimming it down to the 20 takes away a neutral site win over Dayton, a neutral site win over Utah, a road win over Xavier, and a road win over Texas. All of those teams are top 40. And that really is what puts it there, I think. And you look at their losses, they're on the road at Iowa State, TCU, and Kansas. It's hard to really be upset about any of those losses at this point. And all of them were close up until this game against Kansas. The Iowa State was 4. They lost at TCU by 1. And that's part of it, is they've added some really strong wins that have aged well. I mean, Dayton and Utah have aged better than pretty much anyone could have expected. For Houston, Xavier continues to be a team that the metrics enjoy, despite not having a great overall record. And quite frankly, winning at BYU is about as good as it gets in the net this year.
They also, even from a resume metrics perspective, are just as their resume metric average is the same as what UConn's is. Now there's, holes you could poke in some of that, but really from an average resume metrics, they're tied for 2nd in the country. So it's not just the quality stuff that puts them there, but can understand the skepticism. But there's other things to, when you look at there's a lot of things that point to them still being a 1 seed. Now they drop more of these games, that can change pretty quickly in the Big 12 as they get going, but the combination of all
they
those
have
things
still won 5 of 6.
So what was
they
that?
They have still won 5 of 6. They have still won 5 of 6.
That's not good enough for Greg. That's not good enough for Greg. He expects.
I mean, the 5 of 6. Sure. Sorry, I'm not impressed from the home wins over UCF and Utah. That win aged so well. They're 4-5 in their last 9 in the Pac-12. What a great win that was.
It has aged well. They're going to be a single-digit seed.
I like that our consensus has Purdue and UConn ahead of Houston, something that Ken Palm does not have. I'll leave it at that. All right, we're going to go to break here. Coming up, we are going to start talking about this Big 12 conference, where there's clearly a lot of various opinions. That's coming up next on Fielding the 68.
As you guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 each and every week of the college basketball season. We have a special offer that will be available starting on Tuesday, January 9th and running through Monday, February 12th, the morning after Super Bowl 58. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, in honor of the big game, you can use the bonus code FIELD158 and you'll get $158 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not you win that first bet. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app. Sign up using the bonus code FIELD158. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game. You'll receive $158 in bonus bets regardless of the outcome of your bet. Just make sure that you use that bonus code FIELD158 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available under one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient when I have to go cover games in New York or Philly, which happens quite a bit. When you cross state borders, you just log into your existing account and fire away. You don't have to create separate accounts in each state. It's easy, it's simple, it's clean. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the heart of the college basketball season. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odd boosts, and my favorite, a nice juicy parlay boost. So download the BetMGM app and sign up today. Field 158.
Welcome back. We are live here on Fielding the 68, the Field of 68's bracketology show every Monday and Friday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, brought to you by Rhythm. I got Andy Bottoms here. I got Lukas Harkins with me. My name is Greg Waddell. Gentlemen, I teased before break we were going to talk about the Big 12. Well, Andy's about to save me because we're actually going to talk about bubble teams. But luckily for me, there's a Big 12 team in Andy's bubble teams. Let's get right into it, Andy. Give us your last four in that are currently your bubble teams to watch right now.
Yeah, so the four for me had Mississippi State, metric-wise, average out in the 40s on both. 6-6 road neutral, the odd combination of 6-0 in neutral games and 0-6 in true road games, I believe. So kind of a weird profile in that regard. Got blown out at Alabama over the weekend, but they still have home wins over Tennessee and Auburn, neutral court win over Washington State and Northwestern. So some good things on their profile still, but overall just starting to pile up losses a little bit. Do have a Q4 loss as well to Southern. So they're one of them. Virginia, I know, was talked about on the show on Friday. Again, metrics look really solid, particularly from a resume perspective, which helps for selection. Winning at Clemson over the weekend was a big one to give them at least a little bit of breathing room as you look over them. So their losses have all come by at least 16 points. And so a Q3 loss to Notre Dame is in the mix there as well. But they've beaten Florida on a neutral court, won at Clemson, as I mentioned. So some solid things there, nothing spectacular. And really, again, they're going to be another team in the ACC where some of those opportunities are a bit limited, but they have 3 of the next 4 at home where they've been really strong, starting with Miami tonight. Seton Hall is there. You look from a metric standpoint, they don't stand out, and there's an argument to be made that the metrics could keep them out. But they do have 4 quad one wins, beating UConn, beating Marquette, and even road wins at Providence and at Butler. Really stand out as you look at other teams around the cut line. Challenges, they're just 7-8 in meaningful games, whatever you want to call the games against the top 3 quadrants. So just 7-8 there. The Kadari Richmond injury plays a bit of a factor in the loss to Providence that they had. So some moving pieces there as well, but they're still in for now. And then Cincinnati, the Big 12 team to save you, Greg, was the last team that I had in the field. Metric-wise, Lukas alluded to this earlier. Really strong quality metrics. The resume metrics took a nice boost by winning that game at Texas Tech. Have also won at BYU and knocked off TCU. So biggest challenge for them, the strength of schedule, non-conference strength of schedule is almost 300th. They're 3-5 in road neutral games. And so 8 of their wins have come in quad 4. Big 12, again, we've talked about this over and over again. They're going to give you lots of chances for good wins. They've got Houston coming up on Saturday. They don't play during the week this week. They host Iowa State in the next game after that. So a couple good home opportunities for the Bearcats to solidify their spot in the field.
I want to ask you one question about one of your 4 teams. Virginia is the one that caught my eye. 17-5, 8-3 record alone. I think a casual fan would be like, that's a tournament team, especially in the Tony Bennett era of Virginia. Are they in a spot where they really need to upgrade the resume with a marquee victory? Because you don't get a ton of opportunities like that in the ACC. Do they need to beat a North Carolina or a Duke in order to make this field, or do they just need to hold serve against teams that are below them?
I think they'd probably be okay, just given where their metrics are, if they were able to hold serve in those games. Again, this stretch of 4 games they have coming up is Miami at home, at Florida State, Pitt at home, Wake at home. So no horrible teams in the mix, some that help you a little bit, but you just can't afford to lose. So I think as long as they continue to win those games, they'll be okay. It's just some of these conferences that have more chances to slip up than it does to really bolster your profile, or where it gets difficult. And I put Virginia in that category, but the metrics, particularly on the resume side, are strong enough that so long as they win even some of these middle of the road games, they should be in relatively good position coming down the stretch.
Yep, dangerous spot to be in when you just have a lot of games that could hurt your resume more than it could help it necessarily. All right, let's throw it to Lucas next. Lucas, give us your last 4 teams in.
Yeah, first I'm amused by Andy's last 4 in, as Cincinnati, Seton Hall, Virginia are my 5th, 6th, and 7th last teams in the field. So none of those cracked my last 4 in, but they are right in that last 8 for me. My last 4 in, very SEC heavy today. Ole Miss, Florida, Mississippi State, and St. John's. For Ole Miss, it's a great resume metrics-wise. Like they're 17th in KPI, 14th in strength of record. They're going to have the lowest quality metrics of any team in my projected field right now. They're averaging 70 across BPI and KenPom. They don't have a Quad 1A win. 14 of their total wins this year are in Quad 3 and Quad 4. I think this is a team that makes the field before the last 4 in, but is seeded towards the end of the field because of those quality metrics. As for Florida, obviously picked up the big win last week, but dropped one close this weekend. They're now 1-7 in Quad 1 games this year, 4-7 across the upper 2 quadrants. They have really good metrics kind of across the board. They're top 40 in all 6 team sheet metrics, but being just 1-7 in Quad 1 puts them behind a lot of those bubble teams. Like a Mississippi State has 3 Quad 1 wins, for example. But with Mississippi State, they're now up to down to 5-7 in Quads 1 and 2. They have a Quad 4 loss that kind of drags them down. And when you speak about a team that has a lot of opportunities to play their way out of the tournament, St. John's still has all 4 games against DePaul and Georgetown coming up, and they've now played themselves down towards the cut line here. They're 7-8 against the upper 2 quadrants, but they're 0-5 in Quad 1A games. They've had a lot of opportunities to prove that they deserve to be in the field. They haven't exactly hit on those. They're 2-7 against the upper first quadrant. I think they still have some work to do, although the schedule is pretty favorable coming on the stretch, as long as they avoid those landmines, the Blue Demons and Hoyas.
I want to drill you a little bit here on Mississippi State, who you were mentioning the quality metrics of. And I noticed that we've got it was Ole Miss, not Mississippi State. We had the KPI with Ole Miss at 17, and then we had the net and the BPI much higher. Can you explain why would the KPI be so drastically in a better spot than some of those other quality metrics?
Yeah, well, the KPI and strength of record are 17 and 14, and those are resume-based, and that comes back to being only having 4 losses all year. They have a tremendous record. As far as their efficiency metrics, like the net has efficiency baked into it in some capacity. They're 61st there. BPI and KenPom are both efficiency-based. They're 77th and 63rd. They haven't been an impressive team this season relative to their results to date. And that's what I think personally, my bracketology belief is I'd lean more on resume metrics for inclusion in the field, and then on quality metrics for where you're going to be seated. So I think Mississippi is a better chance to be selected right now than last 4 in, but I have them seated as one of my last 4 teams in the field as a result of that. And some of that comes back to just the further you get down toward more things that pop out to you. And for Ole Miss, what pops out is the poor quality metrics and ranking 322nd in the country in non-conference strength of schedule.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. Let's take a look at our consensus last four in. Obviously, there was some differences between these two, and here we have, well, a little bit of a mix of both. You see that Cincinnati that Andy had makes this list. Florida, who Lucas had, makes this list. Seton Hall, Andy had, makes this list. Mississippi State, you both had. So a little bit of a mix here. In general, I'm going to assume neither of you have any major issues with our consensus last four in. Do either of you have anything you want to jump in on that you disagree with from that, or no?
All four of those teams are in my field.
Yeah, and same with mine. And I know Lucas mentioned the same thing, but I had Ole Miss and Florida as my next two that were just clear of the last four in. So it is a somewhat clear group of teams that are right around there, and I'll get to where I had St. John's here in a couple of minutes. But yeah, I think there's, and any time you get there, I think Ole Miss is such a hard one to seed because of what Lucas described. I don't remember, and I haven't really gone back to look what the biggest gap between some of those metrics has been over the course of time. But I struggle a lot with Ole Miss when you look at that resume average of 15.5, and then there's a 55, a gap of 55 between that and the quality metrics. So trying to figure out what to do with them, and it almost becomes a question of, have they done it enough or so much? If you believe in the resume metrics with that they maybe deserve a better fate. And I tend to view it similar to Lucas in terms of using the quality metrics for that. But that's really why I had them just outside of that. But they're as hard a one as I can remember recently to do that with. And I think you look at, as they've played better teams in SEC play, they've gotten blown out on multiple occasions. And so I think that also factors in. Obviously, that drives those quality metrics down. But losing by 26 to Tennessee, 23 to Auburn the first time, 14 to Auburn the second time, and even to LSU by 9, the margin has really hurt their quality metrics and driven some of that down. And also hard to ignore when you see the team on the floor against some of the better teams, and then they're losing handily in a lot of those games. It's hard to kind of reconcile that with what some of the metrics do.
Yeah, they're a team that the next month I'm going to say a lot.
Let's move to our first four out here, guys. I'm going to have us move a little bit quicker because we got a break coming up here. I want to get Lucas, then Andy's first four out, and then we'll show our consensus as well. Give me quick hitters on your teams as we go. Lucas, let's start with your first four teams out of the field as of today.
Yeah, my first four out right now are Colorado, Providence, Wake Forest, and Oregon. Colorado's got really good metrics across the board, but they're just 1-4 in quad one, which has put them in a tough spot. 7 of their wins are in quad four. Providence obviously has 3 great wins, 2 of which are in quad 1A. But those wins over Marquette and Wisconsin both came with Bryce Hopkins, and those still matter, but I think are probably going to be discounted and seen as a little bit more of what have you done without Bryce Hopkins. And most recently, that's a blowout loss to Villanova. Wake Forest has great quality metrics, but they're without a quad 1 win so far this year. Without that, I think it's going to be hard to make the field in an ACC that doesn't give you that many opportunities. And Oregon's just kind of settling around in the middle of the bubble conversation. They're a step behind in just about every single statistic, but they are still right there and knocking on the door.
A lot of Pac-12, a lot of ACC, I feel like, coming up in these bubbly conversations. Thank you, Lucas. Andy, let's throw it to you next. Give us your first four out.
Yeah, definitely some differences here, although, to be fair, I had St. John's as my first team out. That was really the only one that I felt bad, I guess you could say, leaving out for the reasons that Lucas talked about of having them in. Quality metrics are relatively solid, but 2-7 in those quad 1 games, and have some landmines to avoid going forward. They were really the other team that had serious considerations. I don't know. I looked at the teams that Lucas mentioned, but as you go through here, Villanova, you've got just 2 games over 500 at this point, but with some really solid wins, 6 wins in the top 2 quadrants, including 2 quad 1A wins, good quality metrics, not so great resume metrics. Memphis's downfall has been precipitous. We've all talked about that on here before, but the resume metrics are still not terrible. The net is not good, but they're hanging around. And then Colorado, for the reasons that Lucas said I had in there. Providence would have been my 5th team out. When you look at what they've done without Bryce Hopkins, they're 3-5 without him. They won at home against Georgetown, at DePaul, and at Seton Hall when they didn't have Kadari Richmond. So just becomes tough. If they're going to be evaluated without him, things really get difficult. And even with their total body of work, their average resume metrics are 60.5. So even if you didn't discount some of what they'd done without him, they'd still be in a pretty tough spot from a resume metric standpoint.
Yeah, so Colorado, the overlap between you two, but certainly a lot of teams in the mix. Let's take a look at our consensus first four out. Once again, teams that we just mentioned. St. John's, who made it into Andy's first four out. Villanova, same thing. Colorado, both these guys had in their first four out. And then Providence, which was in Lucas's. Lucas, I'll just throw to you for comments here. Your thoughts on our consensus, anything you strongly disagree with?
No, I don't think so. I have Villanova a little bit further out than the rest of the group does. But I also think that that's a team that can really quickly make a push. They're KenPom favorites in 3 of the next 4 at Xavier. They're an underdog, but then Seton Hall at home, at Georgetown, Butler at home. It's a team that if they start getting up wins, if they can win those 4, they're 16-10 all of a sudden with wins over Texas Tech, North Carolina, Creighton, Xavier. Like they have the high quality wins. That North Carolina neutral site win is phenomenal. Like if they start building up wins again, they can get back in there. But a 5-game losing streak before this one Providence game, we're not certain where they're going to stand in 2 weeks from now.
I honestly thought winning the battle for Atlantis might hurt their resume at this point. That's sort of where I was at looking back at that field. But hey, no comment. Hey, guys, good job on this. We appreciate all the insight on our last 4 in, first 4 out. Coming up, we are going to move to some conferences we want to talk about. The Mountain West is rising, and the SEC has a battle at the top. That's next on Fielding the 68.
There is nothing in sports better than the heart of the college basketball season, which is why I need to tell you guys about our partners over at Rhythm. If you're into sports betting, you need a Rhythm, the place for data-backed props and picks. For those that are unfamiliar, Rhythm, spelled RITHMM, is the go-to mobile app for player props and game picks. Backed by AI predictive models, Rhythm helps you make smarter and faster betting decisions across all sports, but particularly college hoops, where there are as many as 150 games a day during conference play, many of which have softer lines at BetMGM than you'll find in the NFL or the NBA. With Rhythm, you get data-backed picks for every Division I game every day. Users get free picks daily with the ability to upgrade to unlimited access. And for those of you already using modeling, you can build custom sports betting models within the Rhythm app itself. I am a Rhythm user, and I found that I've been a better bettor when I focus on lines where my gut and Rhythm's modeling are aligned. When I think UConn can cover on the road against Butler and Rhythm backs that up, we fire. But Rhythm also helps lead you to plays that you didn't know you needed to make. Like, for example, when the data says bet the over in UMass Lowell versus New Hampshire because you have a 61% edge on that line, you bet the over and you bink. So if you want to increase your edge and win more bets, go to the link in the description below and download Rhythm today. That's RITHMM, the place for data-backed props and picks.
Thank you for joining us today here on Fielding the 68, our bracketology show here at the Field of 68. I got Andy Bottoms with me. I got Lukas Harkins with me. My name is Greg Waddell. We just broke down our bubble teams. Now we're going to move to a couple conferences that I want to ask these guys a few more specific questions on. I alluded to this at the top of the show. The SEC has a battle at the top right now, but I am most impressed with the Tennessee Volunteers. Going on the road to Rupp Arena, hanging 100 on Kentucky and emerging victorious. They've caught my attention. I think they've caught college basketball fans' attention everywhere. Have they caught the bracketologists' attention, though? At the beginning of the show, you guys agreed our 1 seeds are consensus as they've been for a couple weeks. How close is this Tennessee team to entering that conversation, cracking the 1 line? I'll throw it to Andy first, and then we'll get thoughts from Lucas.
Yeah, they're right there. Definitely a team considered in with North Carolina for that last spot. Them and Arizona were the 2 that I had furthest up. Kansas a little bit further behind just because some of the quality metrics aren't as good when you think about seeding. But there's lots to like about where Tennessee is. Metrics are really strong across the board. They've got 4 Quad 1 wins, all of which fall in Quad 1A. Played a really tough non-conference schedule, which the committee likes. And you look through those losses. The home loss to South Carolina is one they wish they had back because it was at home, but other losses were all relatively close. But being able to win, beat Alabama, win at Wisconsin, which helps a little bit as the Badgers are, were in more of contention for 1 seed yesterday than they are today. But beating them, beating an Illinois team that's solid, and winning at Kentucky, as you said, Greg, is key. And so, like I said, they've got a tough close to the season, but they've got some runway here coming up. They've got LSU at Texas A&M, which would be tough, then at Arkansas, Vandy, and at Missouri. So a chance to reel off some other wins here before and hope that other teams in front of them drop games and could have a chance to get them on that one line sooner rather than later.
Lucas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they're the most intriguing contender for a 1 seed for the last week and a half of the season, last 2 weeks of the season. They're going to close Auburn at home, at Alabama, at South Carolina, Kentucky at home. Those are 4 games that are just like massive movers. If they get hot in that stretch, and this is a really good basketball team. Like at worst, they're going to get a 2 or a 3 seed. I think at this point they're just playing so well. And I think that closing stretch, honestly, I think it's really hard that late in the year to jump someone for the 1 seed, because you kind of need another team to, like, one of those ones to lose to get on there. But with the way Tennessee's schedule sets up, they might be able to just jump.
Yeah, it's possible for sure. So I'm gonna do something very dumb personally for me. I'm gonna expose myself for being bad at this. I am not a bracketologist. I'm the host of this show. I want to tell you guys how I'm viewing the 1 seed line right now. I see Purdue, I see UConn, I see North Carolina. I think those 3 teams are essentially going to coast to their conference championships at this point. I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. And then I see the mess that is the top of the Big 12. It's up for contention right now. There's a mess at the top of the SEC right now. It's up for contention right now. Is that the battle for the 1 seed? Like, if Tennessee is going to crack the 1 line, is it going to be that they emerge as SEC champions and they build a resume that's better than maybe the Big 12 champion? Or is there a way where they could even leapfrog over the 3 teams that I just mentioned? We'll go reverse order. I'll throw to Lucas first, and then I want to get Andy's thoughts too.
Yeah, I think they could leap over North Carolina. I wouldn't be that surprised if they get into that conversation where they could jump North Carolina. And I think you're right. I think the only team you haven't mentioned there that I think still has a shot, like a realistic shot at a 1 seed, is Marquette. They still get UConn twice, and that's really an opportunity there for them to build a resume closer to the top line too. I think they're the longest shot. That's not a Tennessee or a Big 12 school, but I think they are in that mix.
The only thing I'd add to that is really the North Carolina piece of things. I think the schedule sets up a bit for them to coast, as you said, but if they take losses, there aren't nearly as many good losses to take. And even if they just take a couple of those, I think that's where maybe they come back to the pack a little bit and end up maybe behind the Tennessee. Or if somebody emerges from the Big 12, that just seems unlikely. Or we were at this point, I don't think anybody has less than 3 losses in the Big 12. So you're almost halfway through. The odds of losing the champion having 6 losses feel pretty high. So at some point, no matter how good the losses are, those teams may just play their way back onto the 2 line, depending upon how things shake out.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Thanks, guys. I mentioned there's a bunch of other teams at the top of this SEC conference. There's 4 others that I have on a list that are really fighting it out for a protected seed right now. That would be Auburn, Alabama, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Obviously, we don't need to go full prediction mode, but how do you guys sort of evaluate those teams that are in the mix as far as how many of them could get protected seeds? Andy, what do you think?
I think at least 2 feels likely, potentially a third. I just don't know that you could get all 4 of them up there. Alabama, from a quality metric standpoint, is sitting in a pretty good spot. They do have games left at Auburn, at Kentucky, at Ole Miss, at Florida, so all teams that are in the field. And then they've got home games against Florida, Texas A&M, and Tennessee. So, that's 7 relatively tough games there, but their metrics are really strong and feel like the safest one of those to me. And then you move to Auburn, and the knock on them had been don't have a quad 1 win. They finally do. Metric-wise across the board, their quality metrics are really, really strong, and that's helpful for them. South Carolina, a little bit of a kind of Ole Miss light, if you will. Average resume metrics are at 12, average quality metrics at 46.5. But at some point, can't look past wins at Tennessee and beating Kentucky at home. So it'll be interested to see how they play down the stretch as some of those metrics start to even themselves out. And then Kentucky is the team that I've got 4th out of that group so far on the seed list. Their resume metrics are quite a bit higher than the other 3 teams discussed ahead of that. And even the quality metrics are worse than what Alabama and Auburn are. So lots of opportunities for them as well as everybody with the conference. They've got that Gonzaga home game coming up, but also host Ole Miss and Alabama. and then they go on the road to Auburn, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. So those are the big games left for Kentucky, and if they perform really well in those, could potentially work their way back there. But they lag behind those other three teams, and obviously behind Tennessee when you look at a number of the metrics that are on the team sheets.
Lucas, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm right in line. I think Alabama's the only team I feel comfortable with being a protected seed right now. I have Auburn and South Carolina both on the 5 seed line. Kentucky's on my 6. I think Auburn just needs more quality still. And as a case with South Carolina to me is like, you look at Ole Miss and what they need to do to get in the field. Take a good look at what South Carolina has done recently, because these teams were not far off 2 or 3 weeks ago with the same idea. So I think that's a case in point to monitor for Ole Miss, is try to follow the South Carolina method. But the only team I feel really good about being a protected seed of these 4 is Alabama, and maybe Auburn can get itself there. I don't see more than 2 just because of the losses they're going to have to take against each other.
All right. Okay, I want to move to one other conference that I'm just fascinated by the battles at the top right now. It's the Mountain West Conference. And I think the Field of 68 had a graphic that we put out on the Twitter earlier today that has the Mountain West as one of our stronger conferences in the country, ahead of a couple power conferences like the Pac-12 and the ACC. Right now, every team that is in our consensus bracket as the Fielding the 68 crew is between the 5 and the 9 seed lines. So a lot of moving parts, teams that are kind of, I would say, safely in the field. You're not like last 4 in here, but things can certainly change. Lucas, can any of these teams get higher than the 5 line from the Mountain West?
Sure. I think San Diego State can get there. I gave San Diego State some pretty strong consideration for a 4 seed this morning. I ended up putting them in the 5. And as you said, all my Mountain West teams right now are between a 5 and an 8 seed. I have San Diego State on the 5, Utah State's on the 6, Colorado State 7, Boise and New Mexico on the 8. I think that San Diego State's the only one I feel good enough about contending for a top 4 seed. I think Utah State had a chance up until that loss this weekend. I think that's a harder battle from this point forward, though. I think San Diego State's the one that's in contention for a top 4.
Andy, what do you think? Do you agree with Lucas here?
They're the one that seems to have the best chance, if for no other reason than they're starting higher than the others at this point on my list, and sounds like Lucas is as well. And when you look at their record against the other 5 teams that are in contention, they're 2-3 against those teams, but all the losses were on the road. They still host Colorado State, New Mexico, and Boise State, and then they go to Nevada and to Utah State. So they can go 4-1 in those games. They don't have any other losses in the league. A couple of the other teams have already lost to non-tournament caliber teams in the league, so they're the one that could come out without a quote-unquote bad loss. So they're the one that seems highest to me. Boise is a little bit interesting just because in their 5 games against the other 5 teams, they're 4-1 so far, which is interesting. They were able to win at Nevada and at New Mexico. So in theory, if they run the table and win a few more road games, like they could push their way up there. Maybe they go 4-1 because that would require them to win at least 2 on the road against these other tournament level teams. But when you compare them, they did lose at home to UNLV, so that's kind of where I say some of these have taken on a quote unquote bad loss in the league that San Diego State hasn't taken yet.
Is there any chance that this league gets more than 5 bids? So I'm looking right now, Nevada 17-5 overall, only 4-4 in conference play. But you see that net ranking right there, 56. They are certainly trailing the top 5 that you both have safely in the field right now. Andy, does Nevada have a chance to crack this and make it a 6-bid Mountain West?
It feels tough at this point. The quality metrics and the resume metrics both average out in the low to mid 60s. They're currently 1-3 in the games they've played against these 5 other teams. They only play Utah State once, so they won't get quite as many cracks at them. And they still have to go to Boise, to Colorado State, and to Utah State. They do host San Diego State and New Mexico, but also lost at Wyoming. And so that gives them, they've got a Q3 loss and 2 Q2 losses at this point. So they feel like a long shot. They'd have to perform really well in those 5 games. And the other one that's interesting, the lowest one that I have seated, like first team on the 9 line, is New Mexico. They have played the majority of their games against these teams at home. They still play 4 of the other 5 tournament level teams, if you include Nevada in that, on the road. So they go to Nevada, San Diego State, Boise, and Utah State. So everybody else's was relatively balanced in terms of what they played home and road. They're the one that was a little more weighted toward the home game so far, which they performed well in. But the question, remains of what they can do on the road as they look forward.
Lucas, what Andy was just talking about with New Mexico, with the schedule heating up as the season goes down, does that help or hurt a team like New Mexico, who I believe you said you have them on the 8 or the 9 line right now? Like, is it bad that they have a tough schedule coming up, or is that a good thing?
I think it's all opportunity based. Like, there's opportunities there, but they're positive and negative. You have to take advantage of them to actually move up, and if you don't take advantage of them, then you move down. It's really just up to. I mean, it sounds just plain and simple and obvious analysis, but it's how you play in those games. I mean, but based off that, I do think, to go back to your original question that you posed, I think it's more likely the Mountain West gets 4 than it gets 6.
I hate to hear that. I love this conference, man. Just as a fan of the sport, like
I think
I want
5 is the right number.
Yeah,
I think 5 is the right number.
It would be good for the sport this year if we get 5 Mountain West teams in, if not 6, to be honest. I love watching that league. But, all right, you heard it from the experts. We got to keep an eye on this. Coming up, we're going to talk about the teams that moved the most from the past week, and then we'll get these guys' biggest games to watch in the week ahead on Fielding the 68.
Big news, guys. I am thrilled to announce that we have partnered with Autograph, a company founded by the GOAT himself, Tom Brady. The Autograph Fandom app gives you access to the best college hoops content, fan contests, and exclusive rewards like discounted tickets, all for doing the things that diehard fans like you already do, following your favorite team in the news and listening to podcasts just like this one. When Tom, and yes, I am calling him Tom, we're on a first-name basis these days, co-founded Autograph, he had one mission in mind: change the fan experience for the better. It works like this. You get all of your college hoops content you want in one place. You get articles from your favorite writers, pods from your favorite hosts, contests from your favorite creators, all on the feeds and the sites that you already enjoy. But instead of having to go to all these different places, it all comes to you in one spot, the Autograph Fandom app. But here's the best part. The more content that you consume, the higher you rank in the app. As you consider to level up in status on the app, you can unlock unique rewards curated exclusively for you. So download the free Autograph app in the App Store and use the referral code F68, that's F68, or tap in at the link in the description below or in the podcast app of your choosing to start earning points for doing something as normal as listening to this very podcast. It really is that simple.
Welcome back to the Fielding the 68 Bracketology Show. Every Monday and Friday, we are here live, bringing in the best bracketologists in the business. Today, that's Andy Bottoms and Lukas Harkins. My name is Greg Waddell. Gentlemen, there's a lot of teams that moved all over your seed sheets in the past week. I want to talk about a few of them. We alluded to Texas earlier in the show. Big week for them. They go on the road, get a big victory as a huge underdog over the weekend. Now up to the 7 line from the 11 line. You see the other two I want to ask these guys about, Butler and Indiana State. Butler has gone from the last 4 in up to a 9 seed in our consensus bracket. Indiana State up from 11 seed to a 9 seed. All 3 of these have risen. We like to see teams rising. Good for their fan bases. Lucas, I'll throw it to you first. Which one of these 3 was the most impressive to you in the last week and is in the best spot right now?
Oh, come on. That's not a fair question to ask me. Come on. You know I'm going to have to say Butler because it would just be disingenuous for me not to. Butler has now picked up a second road win over a top 20 net team. They've already won at Marquette. Now they've won at Creighton. They already have a home win over Texas Tech, a neutral site win over Boise State. That's 4 wins over the field, 3 of them coming away from home. 6 and 7 against the upper 2 quadrants. Metrics have really soared lately. They're up to 47th on KenPom, 33rd in strength of record. They've quickly jumped. And quite frankly, a lot of that comes down to having two better wins than just about everybody in the 9 through bubbles conversation. And that's those wins at Marquette and at Creighton, which are really big ones. Now, the schedule is still brutal for the next several games, starting tomorrow night at UConn. It's going to be a tough road, but Butler's put themselves on the right side of the cut line, and definitely a team that improved its seeding more than those other two for me over the last week. Texas, I had on the 10 before and moved up to a 7, instead of us as a consensus having 11-7. Indiana State, props to the other 3 guys in fielding the 68 for joining me on the Indiana State bandwagon. They didn't move for me, basically. I think maybe us seedline. I was already high on Indiana State.
Hey, ahead of the curve, Lucas. Nothing wrong with that. Andy, I got a question for you on this. Why are these gaps so large? Just can one result really move a team 4 seed lines at this point in the season?
I think that says a lot about the state of some of the teams right in that 9 to 11 range as much as anything, where a really big road win can propel you. And I think in some of the cases, this is more so the case, I think with Texas, just they didn't have a ton of great non-conference wins. So every game they get in the league helps them a little bit more, particularly being on the road. I think Butler already having had the win at Marquette, not to say that the win at Creighton didn't help, but I think you knew some things about them already. You just needed some of the metrics to come in line a little bit with what it felt like with the total number of wins. And I think Texas, again, they've got 8 wins in quad 4. So the more you see them be able to beat good teams, the more that can impact their profile, maybe in a disproportionate way. And you look at Texas, they've got 5 quad 1 games left. Now that includes road games at Houston, Kansas, Baylor, Texas Tech. So they need to give themselves a little bit of breathing room by being able to show they can win some of these road games, because they've got a little bit of an odd schedule left. They've got 3 quad 3 games, which are pretty hard to come by in the Big 12, quite honestly. But they're there. In Indiana State, I think I had them as one of the top teams on the 11 line. I think it was being able to beat Drake, somewhat avenge that previous loss. And at this point, their resume metrics average is really strong. Their net's really strong. The challenge for them is don't really have a win over a tournament team. Have 2 quad 2 games left as it stands right now today, neither of which is going to move the needle in a huge way, other than avoiding the losses against Southern Illinois and Missouri State.
Be honest with me, guys. How much does Robbie Avila's aesthetic influence Indiana State's seed line? It's got to bump him up a line, right? No?
Well, I would certainly.
I mean, you're asking 2 guys who wear glasses, so it seems logical that we would be swayed by this in some way.
I'm just saying. I mean, I'd like to see it personally as a fan. That's all. All right. I have some other teams I want to quickly ask you guys on before we get to our biggest games to watch this week. The first one being Clemson. Man, big one coming up for them. Talk about a game to watch. Clemson, North Carolina is kind of approaching on running out of opportunities territory for Clemson at this point. Just 2 quad 1 games remaining on their regular season schedule. They're 3-6 in their last 9. A lot of close losses sprinkled in there. But Lucas, you said it earlier in the show, a loss is a loss. You can't get points for always losing close games. How dire is the situation for Clemson right now?
For one, saying a loss, close losses don't help you very much. About Clemson is kind of amusing. I don't know if Andy would remember, 2017, 2018 Clemson was like the king of couldn't finish one off. But I think Clemson's still okay. I think I have them on a 7 line right now. I think they're still I've dropped Clemson to the 8. So Clemson on the 8 line right now. So I think they're still a touch ahead of that group that we've talked about, that 9 to bubble range. I think they're still just a tad above there. Obviously, that 6-6 record in quads 1 and 2 is still pretty solid, and they have really good metrics across the board. I think they're still in okay shape, but obviously the ACC, as much as we talk about the Big 12 having a ton of opportunities, the ACC has a ton of opportunities to fall.
Yeah. Andy, what are your thoughts on Clemson? Anything you feel differently with Lucas on?
Theirs is just a weird profile. Their non-conference, they beat Boise State, South Carolina, TCU, one at Alabama, and then their best league wins at this point are at Pitt and at Florida State, I think. And so theirs is odd, and it just speaks to unbalanced schedules in these leagues. And when you really only have Duke and North Carolina that'll move the needle in a substantial way, it just doesn't. They're just in a tough spot. As you said, they got 2 quad 1 games at Carolina, at Wake. They do have 4 quad 2 games, but that's Miami and Pitt at home, and at Syracuse and at Georgia Tech. It just none of those teams are in anybody's projected field at this point, and Wake is right around the bubble. So it really puts a premium on those games, or not losing any of the rest, and then you can sit back and point to the non-conference wins, which for them are great and really stand out over what a lot of other teams did in the non-conference.
Yeah, it feels like so many close but no cigars for Clemson right now. Like I said, I have that game against North Carolina circled later this week as one that they would certainly love to get. Another team I got to ask you guys about, Creighton. The close loss to Butler. They dropped 2 seed lines after a toss-up game like that. Lucas, is that an indictment maybe on Butler? Like, you're not supposed to lose at home to Butler? That's your squad here. Why did Creighton drop 2 lines after that game?
I don't know. I didn't drop them 2 lines. I only dropped them about 3 spots. They were, I think, my third 3 seed down to my second 4. I don't think it really made that big of a difference for Creighton, although I do understand the argument. Like, Auburn picks up a win. Alabama's played well. Illinois picked up its close win over Nebraska. It might just be a matter Dayton continues to win. Like, it might just South Carolina continues to. It might just be a matter of teams having a little better weekend than Creighton at the same time Creighton took a loss. But I'm not concerned on Creighton. I think they're still a protected seed for me. I must be ahead of the rest of this group here on the Jayhawks, on the Blue Jays right now.
All right. Andy, any thoughts?
I mean, I like that Luke is just continually disassociating himself from the overall results of the group by like, I didn't do that. This was somebody else's. Somebody else did this. Anyway, so they were my first 5 seed, and they were probably my last 3 coming in. So you don't have to in that situation. You're not dropping quite as much. I think there's certainly an argument to be made that they're on the 4 line, but you really look that they're beat Alabama at home, which was a big one. And then the only other win against a team that I have in my field came at Nebraska, which has proven to be a tough place to win for the top teams of the Big Ten. Did lose at UNLV and some of that. So they've got 7 quad 1 games left, which is crazy at this point, and 1 quad 2 game left. So they don't have any landmines left to hit in Big East play. And so I think they could pretty easily, based on where their quality metrics are, get themselves back up to the 4 line. For those of us who don't have them there already, but they're right in the mix for a protected seed. So I think just a little bit of they're probably low on the 3 line and high on the 5 line. So it looks like a bigger drop than maybe it really was.
I love it. Okay, one last thing to ask you about, Andy. I'll throw this to you first, Andy. Florida Atlantic, 7 games now. In their last 7, they've won 7. 3 were dicey. I mean, they're kind of the inverse Clemson. A 1-point win at Tulane, overtime against UTSA, 3-point win over North Texas. They keep flirting with disaster. How high can Florida Atlantic jump? Or maybe conversely, how far can they fall?
Yeah, they're interesting. I keep looking at their quality metrics because of some of these close calls that you talk about, and keep thinking and waiting on those to drop a little bit. And they haven't right now. They're still 22.5 average in the quality metrics. For them, if you look at the remaining schedule, they've got 5 quad 2 games left. Now, those games are not necessarily against teams that people are going to have in their field. Memphis is one of those if they can continue to play well. But they have road trips to Memphis, North Texas, South Florida, and UAB. So if they can perform well in those games, they just have to avoid losses, unfortunately, at this point. Not that they can't lose any of those games, but for them, there's not any huge surefire tournament teams left to beat on their schedule. But there are some opportunities to really pad their Q2 numbers and their road record, where they're 9-3 in road neutral games already. They come away with those. Those are not necessarily easy road wins to get. So there's still opportunities there for them, just not quite the same caliber as you might see some other teams.
Lucas, I want you to imagine a world where Florida Atlantic wins out the remainder of the season, finishes the regular season with just 4 losses. What seed line are they on come Selection Sunday?
I think it's probably a 4 or 5. I don't think they get higher than a 4. Obviously, the Arizona win still kind of stands out as being the thing that can boost them up a seed. I have them on that top 6 seed right now. I think that they can get to a 5 for sure. I don't know if they can get any higher than a 4, even with a win out.
Interesting. Okay. All right. You heard it there first. Let's look ahead now, gentlemen. Like I said, we have a show on Friday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Kevin Sweeney will be running that show where we will look backwards at what happened this week, but give us a preview. Give us 2 games to watch each. We'll go around the horn quickly with it. Andy, we'll start with you. What 2 games do you have your eye on?
On Wednesday, Nebraska at Northwestern. I think an interesting game for both teams. Northwestern coming off of the game they dropped at Minnesota. And Nebraska, just a heartbreaker, played really well to force overtime at Illinois. They're still really searching for a road win in the league, and so that becomes a big one for them. And then I'll throw out 2 of the teams that we talked about already. Ole Miss at South Carolina, the battle of teams with strong resume metrics, but maybe less quality metrics. A good opportunity for both teams to pick up another win against a team in the field. So that one's on Tuesday. It'll be an interesting matchup in the SEC.
Lucas, what are yours?
Yeah, well, you stole Ole Miss, South Carolina from me. So Boise State at Colorado State in the Mountain West. Boise State's 4-1 in true road games this year, and that has really boosted up their seeding. And Andy mentioned it a little bit earlier with the Mountain West, that Boise State can get really interesting in terms of raising up seed lines if they continue to perform well on the road. This is another one of those big opportunities. Secondly, we got the 12-10 Big East battle. Villanova 12-10 goes at Xavier 12-10. 2 teams that have the metrics to be in contention for bids. Villanova certainly has that North Carolina win as well. The winner of that game will stay pretty close to the mix, whereas the loser will fall a little bit further down.
All right.
And somewhere Rocco would want us to mention that Samford goes to UNC Greensboro on Thursday. So just for him, I feel compelled to mention that.
Shout out to the lovely Rocco Miller, who I believe will be back on the show on Friday. Gentlemen, this was great as always. Thank you to Andy Bottoms. Thank you to Lukas Harkins. Thank you to Dagan Hughes behind the scenes. My name is Greg Waddell. Fielding the 68, our bracketology show will be back on Friday, 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Everybody enjoy this great week of college basketball, and we'll see you Friday.